Sarah Chen had it all: the corner office, the designer wardrobe, and an ego to match. When she spotted her broke ex-boyfriend Michael at a coffee shop, she couldn't resist the urge to humiliate him publicly. But fate has a wicked sense of humor, and within hours, Sarah's world turned upside down. Sometimes life's greatest lessons come wrapped in the most expensive packaging, and success isn't always measured in dollars and cents. Sarah Chen stood in line at the daily grind, her designer heels clicking impatiently against the polished concrete floor. The upscale coffee shop in downtown Seattle had become her regular morning spot since her promotion to senior marketing director at Vertex Industries. Her Prada bag hung from her shoulder, a recent self-gift to celebrate closing a seven-figure deal. The line moved slowly, and her attention drifted to the man 3 people ahead of her. Something about his worn leather jacket and messy dark hair seemed familiar. When he turned slightly to check his phone, her heart skipped a beat. Michael Torres, her ex-boyfriend of 2 years. The sight of him brought back memories she'd tried hard to suppress. They'd met in college, both ambitious business majors with big dreams. Michael had always been brilliant but unconventional, more interested in his tech experiments than climbing the corporate ladder. His refusal to sell out, as he called it, had been a constant source of tension between them. "Still wearing that same old jacket, I see," Sarah called out, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. She couldn't help herself. Seeing him brought back all the frustration of their final months together. Some things never change. Michael turned, his dark eyes widening in recognition. He offered a small, tired smile. "Sarah, it's been a while." 3 years, she said, taking in his appearance. His jeans were faded, his boots scuffed. He looked exactly like the struggling dreamer she'd left behind. "Still working on your revolutionary startup?" Several customers glanced their way, some hiding smirks behind their coffee cups. Sarah felt a rush of vindication. She'd made the right choice, leaving him to pursue her career. "Actually," Michael began, but Sarah cut him off. "Let me guess, you're still just about to break through?" She made air quotes with her perfectly manicured fingers. "That's what you kept saying when you couldn't even afford to take me to dinner at Canlis for our anniversary." A woman in a business suit coughed to hide her laugh. Michael's face remained calm, but Sarah noticed his jaw tighten slightly. "I see you're doing well," he said quietly, nodding at her designer outfit. "Some of us actually planned for our future instead of chasing pipe dreams," Sarah replied. "I just closed a deal worth more than you probably make in 5 years. Michael reached the counter. "Small Americano, please," he said to the barista, pulling out a worn leather wallet. "Oh my God," Sarah laughed, addressing the growing audience of onlookers. "He can't even afford a proper coffee drink. You know, when we were dating, he used to bring me to places like this and only order water. So embarrassing." The barista, a young woman with purple hair, shot Michael a sympathetic look. He handed her a $5 bill and dropped the change in the tip jar. "It was nice seeing you, Sarah," he said, turning toward the pickup counter. "I hope your success brings you happiness." Something in his tone made Sarah's cheeks flush. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a news alert from the Seattle Times. She opened it absently, then froze. Breaking: Seattle startup. Quantum tech acquired by Google for $12.8 billion. The subtitle made her blood run cold. Revolutionary quantum computing breakthrough leads to record-breaking tech acquisition. Founder Michael Torres set to become one of technology's youngest billionaires. Sarah's hand trembled as she looked up from her phone. Michael was already heading toward the door, small coffee in hand. Through the window, she watched him climb into a modest Honda Civic and drive away. "Miss, can I take your order?" Sarah barely heard the barista. Her mind was racing through the implications of what she'd just read. The startup Michael had been working on when they were together, the one she'd dismissed as a waste of time, had just made him a billionaire. She mumbled her order, her earlier satisfaction replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. As she waited for her drink, she opened LinkedIn on her phone. Michael's profile was simple, listing him only as founder and CEO at Quantum Tech. There were no posts bragging about the acquisition, no photos of expensive cars or watches. The last thing he'd shared was an article about quantum computing's potential impact on climate change research. Throughout the day at her office, Sarah couldn't focus. She kept thinking about Michael's calm demeanor in the coffee shop, how he hadn't risen to her bait or tried to defend himself. He must have known about the acquisition. The deal would have been in the works for months. Her coworkers were buzzing about the quantum tech news. "Can you believe this guy?" her colleague Jason said, showing her the article on his tablet. "He developed some breakthrough in quantum stability that Google's been trying to crack for years. They're saying it could revolutionize everything from medical research to climate modeling." Sarah felt sick. She remembered all the nights Michael had tried to explain his work to her, his eyes lighting up as he talked about quantum states and computational possibilities. She'd usually cut him off, complaining that he was wasting time on theories instead of looking for a real job. That evening, she found herself parked outside their old apartment building. Michael had kept the apartment after their breakup since his name was on the lease. She'd moved to a luxurious high-rise downtown, proud to have upgraded her life. The lights were on in their old unit. Through the window, she could see Michael sitting at the same scratched desk where he used to work late into the night. He was still wearing the leather jacket. A woman emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs. She was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun. She set one mug beside Michael and rested her hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her with a smile that made Sarah's chest ache. It was the same way he used to look at her before she started finding reasons to be disappointed in him. Sarah watched as the woman pulled up a chair beside Michael. He showed her something on his laptop, and they both laughed. There was an ease between them that Sarah had never allowed in her relationship with Michael. She'd been too focused on appearances, on what other people thought, on climbing the social ladder. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Vanessa. "OMG, did you see the news about Michael? Girl, you must be dying right now. Think he's still single?" Sarah turned off her phone and sat in the growing darkness. She thought about the coffee shop that morning, how she'd tried to humiliate Michael in front of strangers. He could have easily put her in her place, could have mentioned that he was about to become one of the wealthiest people in tech. Instead, he'd wished her happiness and walked away. The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the daily grind, half hoping to run into Michael again. She had rehearsed an apology in her head all night, but he wasn't there. The barista with the purple hair recognized her. "Regular almond milk latte?" she asked coolly. "Yes, please," Sarah said, then hesitated. "About yesterday. I was really awful to that customer." The barista raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent. "He's actually a regular here, isn't he?" Sarah asked. 5 years now," the barista replied. "Comes in most mornings, always orders the same thing, always tips well." She paused. "Always treats everyone with respect, no matter what they order or what they're wearing." Sarah swiped her card to pay. "Has he been in this morning?" "He called earlier, actually. Asked us to add $1,000 to our suspended coffee program. You know, where people can prepay for coffee for those who can't afford it." The barista's expression softened slightly. "Said something about paying forward some good news he'd received." Sarah found herself blinking back tears. She remembered how Michael used to buy coffee for struggling students during finals week, even when his own bank account was nearly empty. She'd told him it was naive, that people needed to learn to take care of themselves. All at once, Sarah realized that while she'd been so concerned about appearing successful, Michael had actually been changing the world. While she'd been climbing the corporate ladder, he'd been pursuing something bigger than himself. While she'd been collecting status symbols, he'd been building connections with people who saw his true worth. Later that morning, Sarah sat in her corner office, staring at her impressive view of the Seattle skyline. Her computer screen showed a draft email to Michael that she'd been working on for hours. She kept writing and deleting, unable to find the right words to express her regret, her understanding, and her belated admiration for who he'd always been. The local business news played quietly on her office TV. They were interviewing various tech experts about quantum tech's breakthrough. One segment caught her attention. "What's remarkable about Torres's approach," a Stanford professor was saying, "is that he refused multiple buyout offers over the years, some quite substantial. He insisted on perfecting the technology first, ensuring it would be used for humanitarian applications. The Google deal includes unprecedented provisions for making the technology accessible to researchers working on climate change and medical solutions in developing countries." Sarah minimized her email draft and opened her company's internal job board. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering if she was on the right path. Her salary was impressive, her office was enviable, But when was the last time she'd felt truly proud of her work? When was the last time she'd thought about making a real difference in the world? She pulled up her own LinkedIn profile with its carefully curated image of corporate success and began to type a new post. It wasn't an apology to Michael. That would need to be done in person, if he'd ever give her the chance. Instead, it was an honest reflection on success, pride, and what truly matters in life. As she wrote, she glanced at her designer bag, remembering how proud she'd been to show it off just yesterday. Now, it seemed like a hollow symbol of everything she'd gotten wrong. She thought about Michael's worn leather jacket, how she'd judged him for keeping it all these years. She wondered if it had been his father's, like so many things she'd never bothered to ask about when they were together. The morning light caught the Seattle skyline, transforming the glass buildings into mirrors of the rising sun. Sarah's computer screen showed a notification. Michael Torres had just announced the creation of a new charitable foundation focused on making technology accessible to underserved communities. The press release mentioned that the foundation would be headed by Dr. Maya Rodriguez, the woman Sarah had seen in his apartment, described as renowned for her work in ethical technology distribution. Sarah's phone began lighting up with messages from friends and colleagues, all assuming she must be devastated by Michael's success with another woman. They expected her to be bitter about missing out on becoming a billionaire's wife. But as she sat in her expensive office, surrounded by the trappings of what she'd always thought of as success, Sarah felt something entirely different. Sarah found herself reaching for her coat and bag, suddenly needing to get out of her office. She told her assistant she'd be taking a personal day, something she'd never done in her 5 years at Vertex Industries. Walking through downtown Seattle, she passed all the familiar luxury boutiques where she usually spent her weekends. Through the windows, she saw women like herself, carefully dressed in designer labels, examining expensive handbags with the same critical eye she'd once used to evaluate everything and everyone in her life. She ended up at Pike Place Market, where she and Michael used to spend Saturday mornings during their first year together. They'd buy coffee from the original Starbucks and wander through the stalls, sampling fresh produce and watching the fish throwers. Michael would always stop to talk to the local vendors, genuinely interested in their stories. She'd usually hurry him along, embarrassed by his worn jacket among the tourists with their expensive cameras. Sarah Chen. She turned to find Rachel, Michael's younger sister, standing behind her with a basket of fresh flowers. Rachel had been in high school when Sarah was dating Michael. Rachel, hi, Sarah managed, suddenly aware of how her Louboutins must look among the market's puddles. I saw the news about your brother. Rachel's expression was guarded. Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. Though honestly, nothing's really changed. He's still the same Michael. He always was consistent, Sarah said softly. I just didn't understand that was a strength. Rachel studied her for a moment. You know what's funny? He never blamed you for leaving. He said you both just wanted different things from life. She adjusted her basket. Though I blamed you plenty. I used to think you were so sophisticated, exactly the kind of successful woman I wanted to be. Now I'm starting to think I had it backward. What do you mean? Well, I'm finishing my PhD in environmental science. Michael's been helping fund my research on urban farming initiatives in low-income areas. Not exactly glamorous work, but Rachel shrugged. It matters, you know? Sarah thought about her own work, the marketing campaigns she'd crafted to convince people they needed things they couldn't afford. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. He's giving a talk at the university next week, Rachel said after a pause, about ethical technology and responsible innovation. It's open to the public. Sarah's heart raced. Would it be inappropriate if I attended? Depends on your reason for going, Rachel replied honestly. If you're looking to network with the newly minted billionaire, I should warn you there's already plenty of that going around. But if you actually want to learn something, she shrugged again. Michael's never turned away anyone who was genuinely interested in the work. That evening, Sarah found herself deep in research about quantum computing and its applications. She read about how Michael's breakthrough could help optimize shipping routes to reduce carbon emissions, improve weather prediction models for farmers in developing nations, and accelerate drug discovery for rare diseases. The more she read, the more she realized how little she'd understood about what he was trying to achieve. She came across an interview from 2 years ago, when quantum tech was still operating out of that small apartment. The interviewer had asked Michael about his modest lifestyle, despite having received several rounds of funding. "Money is just a tool," he'd said. "Like any tool, its value lies in how you use it. I've seen too many startups get caught up in projecting success through superficial means, losing sight of their original mission. We're trying to solve real problems here. Everything else is just noise." Sarah remembered making fun of him for saying things like that. She'd called him naive, idealistic, out of touch with reality. Now his words seemed like the most clear-eyed assessment of success she'd ever heard. A week later, Sarah sat in the back row of the university auditorium, watching Michael present his vision for ethical technology development. He was wearing a new jacket, she noticed, but otherwise looked exactly the same. Dr. Maya Rodriguez sat in the front row, taking notes and occasionally sharing knowing smiles with him when students asked particularly insightful questions. "The biggest mistake we make in tech," Michael was saying, "is thinking that progress is linear, that success can be measured in quarterly reports and market valuations. But real innovation isn't about moving fast and breaking things. It's about moving thoughtfully and fixing things." Sarah found herself taking notes, really listening. Michael explained complex concepts with the same passion he'd had years ago, but now she could see how all the pieces fit together. He wasn't just chasing an abstract dream. He was building a framework for using technology to address systemic problems. After the talk, she waited while others crowded around him. Students eagerly shared their own project ideas, which Michael discussed with genuine interest. Dr. Rodriguez moved smoothly through the crowd, collecting business cards and making introductions. They worked together seamlessly, clearly united by more than just professional goals. Finally, the crowd thinned. Sarah stood frozen, unsure whether to approach. But then Michael looked up and saw her. His expression was curious but not unwelcoming. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said as she walked over. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the coffee shop." Sarah twisted her hands together. "I read everything I could find about your work. It's incredible, Michael. Not just the technology, but the way you're implementing it." "Thank you," he said simply. "That means a lot." Dr. Rodriguez appeared at his side. "The student's response was amazing," she said, then noticed Sarah. "Oh, hello." "Maya, this is Sarah Chen," Michael said. "Sarah, Dr. Maya Rodriguez, our Chief Impact Officer." "It's nice to meet you," Maya said warmly. "I loved your recent LinkedIn post about redefining success. It was very honest." Sarah blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected either of them to have seen that. "We're actually heading to a dinner with some students who are working on an interesting urban farming AI project," Michael said. "Would you like to join us? Rachel mentioned running into you at Pike Place. She's leading the research team." The invitation was genuine, without a trace of triumph or condescension. Sarah realized that while she'd spent years climbing over others to reach the top, Michael had been building elevators to bring people up together. Sarah hesitated for a moment before accepting the dinner invitation. As they walked to the restaurant, a modest local place rather than the upscale establishments she was used to, she observed the easy interaction between Michael, Maya, and the students. They discussed everything from quantum algorithms to climate change, each person's perspective valued, regardless of their credentials or position. The restaurant turned out to be a small Ethiopian place, family-owned and filled with the aroma of spices. The owner greeted Michael with a warm hug, speaking rapidly about how the new point-of-sale system Michael had helped implement was transforming their business. Michael helped several local restaurants upgrade their technology during the pandemic, Maya explained as they settled into a large table. Pro bono work, focusing on family-owned businesses that were struggling to transition to digital ordering. Sarah remembered that period, while she'd been securing her promotion by developing marketing strategies for large corporations to capitalize on the shift to online shopping. Michael had been quietly helping small businesses survive. Rachel arrived with her research team, a diverse group of graduate students whose enthusiasm was contagious. They spread out their tablets and laptops, showing Michael and Maya their latest data on urban farming yields using AI-optimized growing conditions. "The problem," one student explained, "isn't just about growing food efficiently. It's about creating sustainable systems that communities can actually maintain long-term." "That's always the real challenge, isn't it?" Michael responded thoughtfully. "Technology is only as good as its practical application." Sarah found herself drawn into a conversation with a young woman who was developing an app to connect local farmers with food banks. The student's eyes lit up when Sarah mentioned her marketing experience. "We've been struggling with user engagement," the student admitted. "We have this great system, but getting people to actually use it—" "I might have some ideas about that," Sarah heard herself saying. For the first time in years, she felt her expertise could be used for something meaningful. Throughout the dinner, she watched Michael interact with everyone around the table. He was exactly the same person she'd known years ago, passionate, attentive, genuine. The billion-dollar acquisition hadn't changed him because he'd never been motivated by money in the first place. Maya caught her watching and smiled knowingly. "He has that effect on people," she said quietly. "Makes you rethink your priorities." "How did you two meet?" Sarah asked, realizing she genuinely wanted to know. "At a tech ethics conference," Maya replied. "I was criticizing tech companies' approach to developing nations, and he was the only CEO in the room who actually stayed to continue the discussion afterward. Most people would have been defensive, but Michael—" she glanced at him fondly. "He just wanted to understand and do better." The conversation around the table flowed freely, touching on everything from technical challenges to philosophical questions about responsibility and innovation. Sarah found herself speaking less and listening more, absorbing perspectives she'd never considered before. As the evening wound down, Michael's phone buzzed with a news alert. Everyone's phones started going off simultaneously. Rachel pulled up the article first. Another major tech company had just announced layoffs of thousands of employees to boost their stock price. "This is exactly what we're trying to prevent," Michael said, his expression troubled. "The idea that corporate success has to come at the expense of human welfare?" "Actually," Sarah said, surprising herself by speaking up, "I might have some insight into this. My company—" She paused, realizing something for the first time. "My company has been moving in a similar direction. We've been focusing so much on short-term gains that we're losing sight of sustainable growth." The table fell quiet, everyone listening intently. "The metrics we use to measure success," she continued, warming to the topic, "they're all wrong. We track stock prices and quarterly profits, but we don't measure human cost or community impact. We don't even try." Michael was watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, not pride or vindication, but recognition. Like he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time in years. "You know," Maya said, "we're actually working on developing new success metrics for corporations, ways to quantify social impact alongside financial performance. But we've been struggling to get buy-in from traditional marketing departments." "Because they don't speak the right language," Sarah realized. "You're approaching it from an ethics perspective, but you need to frame it in terms they understand. Show them how sustainable practices contribute to long-term brand value." She pulled out her tablet, starting to sketch out ideas. Around her, the students began contributing suggestions, their perspectives blending with her corporate experience in unexpected ways. Michael and Maya exchanged glances as Sarah drew on her years of marketing expertise to outline a strategy for making ethical business practices appealing to traditional corporations. As the night grew later, Sarah found herself the last one at the table with Michael and Maya. The students had left with promises to refine their proposals, and Rachel had headed home to prepare for an early meeting. "You know," Michael said carefully, "we're building a team to handle corporate outreach, people who understand both worlds, traditional business and ethical innovation." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but not for the reasons it would have a week ago. Not because he was a billionaire making an offer, but because for the first time in her career, she saw a chance to do work that actually mattered. Sarah spent that night unable to sleep, her mind racing with possibilities. The corporate outreach position Michael had mentioned wasn't just a job offer. It was an opportunity to reshape how businesses viewed success. But it would mean leaving behind everything she'd spent years building: her corner office, her prestigious title, her carefully cultivated image. The next morning, she walked into Vertex Industries with new eyes. The sleek office space, once a source of pride, now felt hollow. She noticed how her colleagues avoided eye contact in the elevator, everyone too busy projecting importance to connect with each other. During her morning meeting, the CEO was discussing a new marketing campaign targeting financially stressed millennials. "We need to leverage their insecurities," he said. Make them feel like our product is the key to being taken seriously. Sarah felt her stomach turn. How many times had she pitched similar strategies? How many people had she helped manipulate into buying things they couldn't afford, all to maintain an image that didn't bring real happiness? Actually, she found herself saying, I have some concerns about this approach. The room fell silent. Sarah Chen never disagreed in executive meetings. Studies show that millennials are increasingly focused on authentic value and ethical business practices, she continued, drawing on her research from the night before. What if we instead developed a campaign around transparency and genuine utility? That's not how we do things here, Sarah, the CEO said dismissively. We sell aspirations, not authenticity. Maybe that's the problem, she replied, gathering her courage. Maybe we're so focused on selling dreams that we've forgotten about creating real value. The meeting ended awkwardly, and Sarah returned to her office to find several concerned messages from colleagues. Was she feeling okay? Was she having some sort of crisis? Looking around at her designer furniture and wall of awards, Sarah realized she was having a crisis. But not the kind they thought. She was finally seeing clearly how much she'd compromised her own values in pursuit of a hollow version of success. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Some of the students refined their proposals, having a working session over lunch if you'd like to join. Sarah glanced at her calendar, full of meetings about market manipulation and brand positioning. Then she looked at the draft resignation letter she'd started writing at 3 a.m. Before she could second-guess herself, she began typing, Dear Mr. Davidson, I am writing to tender my resignation as Senior Marketing Director at Vertex Industries, effective 2 weeks from today. The words flowed easily after that. She felt lighter with each paragraph, as though she was shedding layers of artificial constraints. When she arrived at the working lunch, held in a sunny conference room at the university, she found the students had already incorporated her suggestions into their proposals. They were excitedly discussing ways to quantify social impact using existing business metrics. Sarah, Rachel waved her over. We were just talking about how to present ethical business practices as a competitive advantage. What do you think about... For the next 2 hours, Sarah immersed herself in meaningful work. No one cared about her designer suit or her expensive shoes. Ideas were judged on their merit, not their source. When she offered a suggestion about marketing language, a freshman student felt comfortable challenging her perspective, leading to a better solution. Michael joined them halfway through, bringing coffee for everyone, simple Americanos from the campus cafe. He smiled when Sarah immediately engaged him in a discussion about incorporating social impact metrics into standard quarterly reports. You know, he said quietly while the others were debating implementation strategies, I always knew you had this in you. Did you? Sarah asked, surprised. Even when I was being temporarily distracted by external measures of success? He grinned. We all get lost sometimes. The important thing is finding our way back. Maya arrived with more student researchers, and the room buzzed with renewed energy. Sarah watched as Michael and Maya coordinated the various teams, their complementary strengths creating a perfect balance. There was no power dynamic, no corporate hierarchy, just shared purpose and mutual respect. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from Vertex. The CEO wanted to meet. HR had questions about her resignation letter. Her team was panicking about client presentations. But for the first time in her career, Sarah wasn't interested in managing perceptions or maintaining status. She was too busy helping a group of passionate students figure out how to present their urban farming data to skeptical corporate boards. That evening, as the working session wound down, Michael asked to speak with her privately. They walked through the campus, the spring air filled with the scent of blooming cherry trees. I've been thinking about your insights on corporate communication, he began. We're not just looking for someone to handle outreach. We need someone who understands both worlds deeply enough to bridge them. Sarah slowed her pace, taking in the implications. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, Michael replied. We're creating a new division focused on corporate transformation, teaching companies how to measure success differently, how to build genuine value instead of just extracting profit. He paused. It won't come with a corner office, and the salary would be significantly less than what you're making now. Sarah thought about her resignation letter, already submitted, about her expensive apartment filled with things that had stopped bringing her joy, about the genuine excitement she'd felt working with the students today. "The salary doesn't matter," Sarah found herself saying. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile." They stopped beneath a cherry tree, its petals drifting down around them like snow. Sarah remembered another spring evening years ago, when she'd ended their relationship under similar trees. She'd told Michael he lacked ambition, that he'd never achieve anything meaningful by refusing to play by corporate rules. "What changed?" Michael asked quietly. "Between the coffee shop and now?" Sarah considered the question carefully. I think I finally understood what real success looks like. It's not about the corner office or the designer labels. It's about..." She gestured toward the research building where students were still working, their passion visible through the lit windows. "It's about creating actual change, making things better, not just more profitable." Michael nodded, but she could tell he was waiting for something more. "And I owe you an apology," she continued, "not just for the coffee shop, but for everything, for not believing in you, for valuing appearances over substance. I was so wrapped up in proving my worth through external validation that I couldn't see the real value in what you were building." A group of students walked past, deep in discussion about their projects. Sarah recognized some of them from the working session, their eyes bright with purpose. "You know what's ironic?" she added. "I used to think you were the one who needed to change, to become more professional. But you were professional. You were just operating on a different level of professionalism, one that prioritized ethics and impact over image." Michael was quiet for a moment, watching the cherry blossoms fall. "I never held it against you," he said finally. "We all have our own journeys to understanding what matters." "Maya's perfect for you," Sarah said suddenly. "I can see how you balance each other, how you share the same values. I'm glad you found someone who understands your vision." "She challenged me to think bigger," Michael admitted. "When we met, I was focused on the technical problems. Maya helped me see the human side of innovation." He turned to face Sarah directly. "Which is why I think you'd be perfect for this role. You understand both worlds now. You can help other people bridge that gap." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another message from Vertex. This time it was an offer, a promotion, a significant raise, stock options. They were trying to keep her. She declined the call. "When would you want me to start?" she asked Michael. "Actually, there's something else you should know first," he replied. "The position, it would involve a lot of travel. We're setting up innovation hubs in developing countries, working with local communities to implement sustainable technology solutions. It's not exactly the glamorous corporate life." Sarah thought about her carefully planned career trajectory, the life she'd thought she wanted. Then she thought about the energy she'd felt in the research room today, the excitement of working on something meaningful. "I've spent enough time being glamorous," she said. "I'm ready to get my hands dirty." They started walking again, discussing the details of the new role. The division would focus on helping traditional corporations transition to more ethical and sustainable business models. It would require Sarah to dismantle many of the marketing strategies she'd spent years perfecting, to rebuild them with integrity at their core. As they passed the university's main square, they saw Maya and Rachel emerging from the research building with a group of students. They were all talking animatedly, their excitement visible even from a distance. "There's one more thing," Michael said, stopping again. "The corporate transformation division, it's not just about changing businesses. It's about changing the whole definition of corporate success. We'll be fighting against deeply entrenched systems, facing resistance from people who profit from the status quo. It won't be easy." Sarah watched the students dispersing into the evening, each carrying a piece of the future they were trying to build. She thought about her own transformation over the past few days, how quickly everything she'd valued had been reframed. "Nothing worthwhile is ever easy," she said, echoing words Michael had often used when they were together, words she'd once dismissed as naive. "You really mean that this time?" Michael observed, a hint of warmth in his voice. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the campus buildings in shades of gold. "I've spent years making things look easy on the surface while feeling impossibly hard underneath. Maybe it's time to do something that's openly challenging but feels right at its core." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. Sarah's resignation from Vertex caused more upheaval than she'd expected. Former colleagues alternated between questioning her sanity and trying to network their way into Michael's new venture. Her mother called daily, oscillating between pride that her daughter was working with a billionaire and concern that she was taking a step down from her executive position. But Sarah barely noticed the chaos. She was too absorbed in the work, spending long days with the research teams and longer nights studying sustainable business practices. She sold her luxury apartment, donating most of her designer wardrobe to women's professional organizations. She found a small but sunny studio near the university, within walking distance of the new innovation hub Michael was building. One morning, about a month after accepting the position, Sarah arrived early at the office to find Maya already there, surrounded by spreadsheets and climate impact reports. "You're here early," Maya said, looking up with a smile. "Couldn't sleep," Sarah admitted. "I keep thinking about our meeting with Global Tech today. Their CEO is someone I used to admire, back when I thought quarterly profits were the only measure of success." Maya nodded understanding. "It's always hardest to challenge our old heroes." They spent the morning refining their presentation, joined gradually by students and researchers eager to contribute. Sarah watched as Maya wove together complex data with compelling human stories, creating a narrative that even the most profit-focused executives would find hard to ignore. Michael arrived just before the meeting, looking thoughtful. "Before we go in," he said, gathering everyone around, "I want you all to remember something. We're not here to shame them for their past practices. We're here to show them a better way forward." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness as they entered the conference room. Marcus Chen, Global Tech's CEO, had been something of a role model during her Vertex days. His aggressive business tactics and focus on shareholder value had once represented everything she aspired to achieve. But as she looked around at her team, Maya, with her deep understanding of ethical technology, the students with their boundless innovation, Michael, with his unwavering commitment to meaningful change, she felt her anxiety transform into determination. Marcus began with a practiced speech about market realities and fiduciary responsibilities. Sarah recognized the language, the subtle dismissal of anything that couldn't be immediately monetized. She'd used similar arguments herself countless times. Then Maya started their presentation, showing the real costs of global tech's current practices, not just in environmental impact, but in human terms. Sarah followed with data demonstrating how companies focusing on sustainable practices were outperforming their traditional competitors in long-term stability and market trust. "This all sounds very idealistic," Marcus interrupted, his tone condescending. "But in the real world—" "With all due respect," Sarah said, standing up, "I used to think the same way. I believed that maximizing short-term profits was the real world, and everything else was naive idealism." She paused, making eye contact with her former role model. "But I was wrong. The real world is running out of resources. The real world is facing climate disaster. The real world is full of talented people who want to make things better, but are trapped in systems that prioritize quarterly returns over human survival." The room fell silent. Sarah could feel Michael and Maya's supportive presence beside her, lending strength to her words. "You know what else?" she continued, her voice steady. "The real world is changing. Companies that don't adapt to sustainable practices aren't just failing ethically. They're failing financially. We can show you the data, project the trends, but more importantly, we can show you how to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Marcus leaned back, studying her with new interest. "You used to be at Vertex, didn't you? Senior marketing director?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "And I left because I realized there are more important things than impressive titles and corner offices." "Like working for a billionaire?" someone else at the table asked snidely. Sarah felt Michael tense beside her, but before he could speak, she responded, "Like working towards something meaningful. The money isn't the point. It never was. I just took too long to understand that. The point," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "is that we have an opportunity here to redefine success, not just for global tech, but for the entire industry." Maya stepped forward, pulling up a new set of projections. "These are your current growth metrics," she explained, gesturing to a complex graph. "And these," she swiped to the next slide, "are what they could look like with our proposed changes." The room stirred as executives leaned forward, their skepticism wavering in the face of hard data. Sarah recognized the look in their eyes. the same awakening she'd experienced herself. But the implementation costs, Marcus began, are offset by long-term gains, Michael interrupted quietly. Not just financially, though that's certainly true. We're talking about market leadership in sustainable technology, positive brand association, employee retention, and first-mover advantage in emerging markets. Sarah watched her former role model wrestling with the concepts. She remembered her own resistance, how tightly she'd clung to old definitions of success. What Mr. Torres is proposing, she added, drawing on her years of corporate experience, isn't just ethical, it's smart business. The world is changing. Companies can either lead that change or be left behind. The meeting ran hours longer than scheduled. As the sun set outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Global Tech's executives peppered them with questions that evolved from skeptical to genuinely curious. Sarah found herself translating between two worlds, helping traditional business leaders understand the value of ethical innovation, while helping her idealistic colleagues frame their solutions in terms corporations could embrace. Later that evening, as they packed up their presentations, Marcus approached Sarah privately. "You know," he said, "I remember when you were first promoted at Vertex. Everyone said you were going places." He glanced around the room, where students and researchers were excitedly discussing the day's breakthrough. "I guess they were right, just not in the way they meant." Sarah smiled, remembering her old ambitions. Sometimes the best destinations aren't the ones we originally planned. As they left the Global Tech building, Michael, Maya, and the team were already discussing next steps. The students were buzzing with ideas for implementing their proposals, while Maya expertly guided their enthusiasm toward practical solutions. "Sarah?" Michael held back as the others headed toward their cars. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." She paused, noting the serious tone in his voice. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, reminiscent of another evening years ago. "That morning at the coffee shop," he said carefully, when everything happened, I want you to know something." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the memory, but Michael continued, "I wasn't just being modest or trying to prove a point by living simply. The truth is..." Maya appeared beside them, car keys in hand. "Everything okay?" Michael smiled at her, then turned back to Sarah. "The truth is, I didn't know about the Google acquisition that morning. We were still in final negotiations. The news broke earlier than planned." Sarah stared at him, processing this revelation. "But that means, Maya said gently, he wasn't pretending to be humble. He wasn't teaching you a lesson. He was just being himself." The weight of this truth settled over Sarah. All this time, she'd assumed Michael had been proving a point that morning, showcasing his moral superiority. But he'd simply been living his values, the same way he always had. "We should get going," Michael said, checking his phone. "We have that conference call with the Singapore team in an hour." As they walked to their cars, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. Michael was wearing his old leather jacket, the same one she'd mocked him for keeping all these years. "Maya," she said suddenly, "would you mind if I asked about the jacket?" Maya's face softened. "It was his father's," she explained. "The last thing he gave Michael before he passed away. It's been repaired so many times, but some things are worth keeping," Sarah finished quietly, understanding at last. "Not because of how they look, but because of what they mean," Michael concluded, sharing a smile with Maya. As they drove away into the deepening twilight, Sarah thought about values, about appearances, about all the ways success could be measured. She thought about her own journey from that morning in the coffee shop to this moment, and about how true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts or designer labels. 6 months later, Sarah stood at a podium in Nairobi, addressing a room full of local entrepreneurs and corporate representatives. The Global Tech Partnership had been just the beginning. Their corporate transformation initiative had spread across continents, helping businesses large and small embrace sustainable practices. "Success isn't about what you own," she told the attentive audience. "It's about what you build, not just for yourself, but for others." In the front row, Michael and Maya sat with their newest team of student researchers. Maya was visibly pregnant now, though she insisted on continuing her field work. Behind them, Rachel was explaining their urban farming technology to a group of local agricultural experts. Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the podium's polished surface, Gone were the designer suits and carefully curated image. She wore simple, practical clothes now, her face tanned from days spent in the field. She looked happy. After the presentation, a young woman approached her. "I saw you in a business magazine last year," she said. "You look so different." Sarah smiled. "I was different. Which version is the real you?" "This one," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Though I had to lose everything I thought I wanted to find out who I really was." That evening, the team gathered on the hotel's rooftop terrace. The African sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Michael's old leather jacket was draped over Maya's shoulders, protecting her from the evening breeze. Students and local entrepreneurs mingled, sharing ideas and dreams, while Rachel excitedly showed Sarah the latest data from their global farming initiative. Sarah's phone buzzed, a news alert about Vertex Industries. Her old company was struggling, still clinging to outdated business practices in a rapidly changing world. She felt a moment of sadness for her former colleagues, still trapped in the pursuit of hollow success. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about how different everything is from that morning at the coffee shop," she replied. "I thought I had it all figured out then. I thought I knew what success looked like." Maya joined them, one hand resting on her growing belly. "And now?" Sarah gestured to the scene around them. The eager young entrepreneurs, the dedicated researchers, the real changes they were making in communities around the world. "Now, I know that success isn't something you can wear or display. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice." "And the best part," Michael added, sharing a knowing look with Maya, "it's something you build together." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah thought about that morning in the coffee shop one final time. She'd tried to humiliate a man for being broke, only to discover that true wealth had nothing to do with money. Michael hadn't needed to become a billionaire to prove his worth. His worth had always been there, in his integrity, his vision, and his commitment to making the world better. The real poverty, she now understood, had been in her own heart. And the real wealth was in finally finding purpose, in doing work that mattered, in building connections that went deeper than status or appearance. A burst of laughter drew her attention back to the present. The students were sharing their vision for the future, a future where success was measured in impact rather than profits, in lives improved rather than resources consumed. Sarah smiled, feeling truly rich for the first time in her life. She had lost the corner office, the designer wardrobe, the carefully constructed image of corporate success. But she had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was finally, truly making a difference. And that, she realized, was worth more than all the billions in the world.